The fluorescent lights of Sal's diner cast their familiar harsh glow across the cracked vinyl booths and worn linoleum floors. It was the kind of place where dreams came to die slowly, one double shift at a time. For Maya Chen, a 26-year-old waitress with calloused hands and tired eyes, it was just another Tuesday night in a life that felt like an endless loop of coffee refills and fake smiles. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had memorized every crack in the floor, every stain on the counter. The dinner rush was winding down, leaving behind the usual collection of lonely souls, nursing their coffee, and the occasional trucker grabbing a quick bite before hitting the road again. Maya had been working at Sal's for 3 years, ever since she dropped out of culinary school when her father's medical bills became a tidal wave that threatened to drown her entire family. The bell above the door chimed and Maya glanced up from wiping down table 6. A man stepped inside and the very air in the diner seemed to shift. He wasn't just well-dressed, he was sculpted from a different reality than everyone else in that cramped space. His suit was charcoal black, tailored with surgical precision, and his shoes gleamed even under the diner's unforgiving lights. He carried himself with a kind of quiet, absolute confidence that didn't need to announce itself. It simply existed. The few remaining patrons instinctively lowered their voices. Even old Frank, who'd been coming to Sal's for 15 years and never shut up about his glory days playing high school football, fell silent. The man chose a corner booth, sliding onto the cracked vinyl with movements that were economical and deliberate. Maya grabbed a menu and a glass of water, forcing her professional smile into place. "Welcome to Sal's. Can I get you started with something to drink?" The man didn't look at the menu. His eyes, a startling shade of grey that reminded her of storm clouds, met hers for a brief, dismissive moment. "Just coffee. Black." His voice was low and resonant, carrying the kind of authority that came from never being questioned. "Coming right up," Maya said, retreating to the counter. Her friend and fellow waitress Carmen sidled up beside her. "Get a load of Mr. Wall Street over there," Carmen whispered, nodding toward the corner booth. $10 says he's one of those tech billionaires, probably owns half the city and thinks he's slumming it down here with us regular folk. Maya frowned as she poured the coffee. The man was staring out the window, his profile sharp and severe against the neon-lit street beyond. He looked less like a businessman and more like a predator taking a momentary rest between hunts. "Well, to me, he's just another customer who wants his coffee hot and his bill quick," Maya replied, picking up the cup and saucer. She walked back to the booth and set the coffee down in front of him. "Here you are, sir." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her cold. "This coffee tastes like dishwater." Maya froze, her hand still resting on the edge of the table. The comment wasn't delivered with anger or complaint. It was stated as a simple fact, the way someone might observe that the sky was blue or that water was wet. "I'm sorry, sir. Would you like me to brew a fresh pot?" "No," he said, finally looking directly at her. His gaze was analytical, dissecting. "What I'd like is for someone in this establishment to understand the difference between coffee and the brown liquid you just served me." The quiet conversation in the diner died completely. Every patron was now watching the exchange with the fascination of drivers slowing down to gawk at a car accident. Maya felt heat rising in her cheeks. She'd been insulted by customers before, but there was something particularly cutting about this man's casual dismissal. "Sir, I understand you're not satisfied with the coffee, but that's the same brew we serve everyone else, and nobody else has complained. That's because nobody else in here knows what good coffee actually tastes like," he replied, his tone never rising above conversational level, which somehow made it worse. The insult hung in the air like smoke from a grease fire. Maya was acutely aware of Carmen's shocked intake of breath, of Frank's jaw hanging open, of the kitchen staff peering through the service window. This stranger had just insulted not only her, but every single person in the diner. The professional smile she'd worn for 3 years finally cracked. "You know what?" Maya said, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. "Maybe you're right. Maybe our coffee isn't up to your standards. But at least we're honest about what we serve here. We don't pretend to be something we're not. Unlike some people who walk into a place like this just to feel superior to the working folks trying to make an honest living. The man's eyebrows rose slightly, the first crack in his composed facade. "Excuse me, you heard me," Maya continued, her voice gaining strength. "You came in here looking for a reason to complain, didn't you? Probably driving around in your fancy car, looking for some dive where you can remind yourself how much better you are than everyone else. Well, congratulations, you found it." The silence in the diner was absolute. Even the hum of the ancient refrigerator seemed to have stopped. The man studied Maya's face with the intensity of someone examining a rare specimen under a microscope. Then, to everyone's shock, he smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a chess master who had just seen his opponent make a particularly interesting move. "You think I'm here to feel superior," he said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "That's an interesting theory. But what if I told you I'm here because I'm genuinely curious about places like this, about people like you?" Maya crossed her arms, her defensive posture unwavering. "People like me? You mean working people who don't have the luxury of complaining about perfectly good coffee because we're too busy earning a paycheck?" The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. He extracted a business card and placed it on the table between them. "My name is Alexander Blackwood. Perhaps you've heard of it?" Maya glanced at the card. The name was embossed in gold lettering, and below it were the words "Blackwood Industries Chief Executive Officer." Her stomach dropped. Even someone working double shifts at a diner knew that name. Blackwood Industries owned half the restaurants in the city, 3 major hotel chains, and had fingers in every aspect of the food and hospitality industry. She looked up at him, and his storm-grey eyes were watching her reaction said, her voice barely above a whisper carefully, "You're him, shame on you. The billionaire who bought out Romano's last month and fired half the staff, who closed down Mickey's Tavern to build another one of your upscale gastropubs." Alexander's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Among other things, yes." "And you are?" "Maya Chen," she replied, lifting her chin defiantly despite the fear creeping up her spine. "Well, Maya Chen," Alexander said, leaning back in the booth, "since you seem to have such strong opinions about honest work and superior attitudes, I have a proposition for you." "A what?" Maya asked, confusion replacing her anger. "You clearly believe that what you do here has value, that the food you serve, the service you provide matters. I disagree. I think this place, and places like it, exist because people have low standards and accept mediocrity." The insult hit like a physical blow. Maya could feel the eyes of her co-workers, her regular customers, people she'd served faithfully for 3 years, all watching to see how she would respond. "So, what's your proposition?" she asked, her voice tight with controlled rage. "A challenge," Alexander said, his voice carrying across the silent diner. "You and I. A cooking competition. If you can prove that your way, your honest working-class approach to food, is superior to what I can produce, then I'll publicly apologise for my comments tonight. I'll also write a cheque to this establishment for $50,000. The collective gasp from the other patrons was audible. $50,000 was more money than Sal's probably made in 6 months. "And if I lose?" Maya asked, though she already dreaded the answer. "If you lose," Alexander said, his smile turning predatory, "then you publicly admit that you and this place represent everything that's wrong with the food service industry. You acknowledge that standards matter, that excellence should be expected, not scorned, and you quit your job here tonight." The proposition hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. Maya's mind raced. $50,000 could save Sal's from bankruptcy. It could pay for her father's treatments, cover her younger brother's college tuition, maybe even give her a chance to go back to culinary school. But if she lost, she'd be humiliated in front of everyone who mattered to her, and she'd be unemployed with bills piling up like snow in a blizzard. Carmen grabbed her arm. "Maya, don't do it. This guy's probably got professional chefs on speed dial. He's setting you up to fail." But Maya was thinking about the nights she'd stayed up until 3 in the morning, experimenting with recipes in her tiny apartment kitchen, about the dishes she'd created that never made it onto Sal's limited menu because they were too ambitious, too complex for a diner's clientele, about the dreams she'd shelved but never quite abandoned. "What are the rules?" she heard herself asking. Alexander's eyes gleamed with something that might have been respect. "Simple. Each of us prepares a 3-course meal. We'll do it right here in this kitchen tomorrow night after closing. We'll invite a panel of neutral judges, local food critics, maybe some culinary school instructors, people who know food but have no stake in either of our worlds. And the ingredients?" Maya pressed. "Whatever we can source locally within a budget of $200 each. No calling in favours from fancy suppliers, no imported truffles or gold leaf. Just honest ingredients and skill." Maya looked around the diner, at Carmen, whose eyes were wide with worry, at Frank, who was nodding encouragingly, at the line cook Tommy, who was giving her a thumbs up from the kitchen window, at Sal himself, who had emerged from his office and was watching the exchange with a mixture of terror and hope. These people had become her family over the past 3 years. They'd covered for her when her dad was in the hospital, celebrated with her when her brother graduated high school, listened to her dreams and never once made her feel foolish for having them. If she took this challenge and lost, she'd be letting them all down. But if she didn't take it, she'd be letting herself down. The weight of the decision pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about proving a point or winning money. This was about dignity, about the value of honest work, about whether someone like her could stand toe-to-toe with someone like Alexander Blackwood and prove that skill and passion mattered more than pedigree and privilege. She thought about her knife roll hidden away in her bedroom closet, the one she'd bought during her first semester of culinary school with money she'd saved from working weekends at a bakery. The knives were good ones, not the best money could buy, but sharp and reliable. She'd kept them oiled and honed even after dropping out, unable to let go of that small connection to the dream she'd been forced to abandon. "You're on," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent diner. "Tomorrow night after closing. 3 courses, $200 budget, neutral judges. And when I win, Mr. Blackwood, you're going to learn that there's more to good food than expensive ingredients and fancy plating." Alexander stood up, extending his hand across the table. "It's a deal, Miss Chen. I look forward to tomorrow evening." His handshake was firm, businesslike, but Maya could feel the calluses on his palm. Interesting. Maybe there was more to Alexander Blackwood than she'd assumed. As he walked toward the door, he paused and looked back at her. "One more thing, Maya. Don't underestimate me just because I can afford to eat somewhere other than here. I didn't build my empire by accepting defeat gracefully." The bell chimed as he disappeared into the night, leaving behind a diner full of stunned patrons and one waitress who had just committed herself to the most important cooking challenge of her life. Carmen grabbed her shoulders. "Maya, what have you done? You just challenged one of the most powerful men in the city to a cooking contest. Do you have any idea how crazy this is?" Maya looked around at the faces surrounding her. These people, this place, it all meant something. It represented the kind of honest, unpretentious approach to food and life that Alexander Blackwood seemed to despise. Tomorrow night, she would prove that heart and soul could triumph over money and arrogance. Or she would crash and burn spectacularly in front of everyone who mattered to her. Either way, there was no backing down now. The news of the challenge spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By the next morning, Maya's phone was buzzing with calls from friends, former classmates, and even a few local reporters who had somehow gotten wind of the story. The small community around Sal's diner had always been tight-knit, but now it felt like the entire district was rallying around one of their own. Maya stood in her cramped apartment kitchen, staring at the knife roll she'd pulled from her closet the night before. The black canvas was worn at the edges, and the leather ties had softened with age. Inside were 8 knives, each one a reminder of dreams deferred but never quite abandoned. Her fingers traced the handle of her chef's knife, a German steel blade that had cost her 2 weeks' worth of tips back when she was 19, and convinced she was going to change the world one perfect dish at a time. Her phone rang, interrupting her reverie. It was her younger brother Danny calling from his dorm room 3 states away. "Maya, what the hell is going on? My roommate just showed me some article online about you challenging a billionaire to a cook-off. Please tell me this is some kind of joke." "It's not a joke, Danny," Maya said, sinking onto her threadbare couch. "It's real, and it's happening tonight." "Are you insane? Do you know who Alexander Blackwood is? He owns restaurants in 12 countries. He's been featured on the covers of business magazines. He probably has a team of Michelin-starred chefs working for him. And you're going to take him on in the kitchen of a diner." Maya closed her eyes, feeling the weight of everyone's concerns pressing down on her. "I know it sounds crazy, but I had to do something. You should have heard him, Danny. The way he talked about the diner, about the people who work there. Like, we're all just settling for less, like what we do doesn't matter." "But Maya, what if you lose? What if this ruins everything?" Her brother's voice was thick with worry, and Maya could picture him pacing around his tiny dorm room the way he always did when he was anxious. "Then I lose," she said quietly. "But at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have stood up for something I believe in." After hanging up, Maya made her way to the local farmer's market. She had exactly $200 in cash, and every penny had to count. The market was bustling with the usual morning crowd, vendors calling out their specials while customers examined produce with the careful attention of people who knew the difference between ripe and overripe could make or break a meal. Maya had been coming to this market since she was a teenager, first with her mother and later on her own when she started getting serious about cooking. She knew which vendors had the best tomatoes, who could be trusted to pick the perfect avocado, and where to find herbs that had been picked that very morning. As she moved from stall to stall, selecting ingredients with the methodical precision of someone who understood that inspiration meant nothing without perfect execution, she began to feel a familiar sensation. It was the same feeling she used to get in culinary school when a particularly challenging assignment would click into place in her mind. The menu was coming together, not as 3 separate dishes, but as a cohesive story told through food. For her appetizer, she selected fresh burrata from an Italian vendor who had been making cheese the same way his grandfather had taught him. She paired it with heirloom tomatoes that were so ripe they yielded slightly under gentle pressure, their skins still warm from the morning sun. Fresh basil with leaves so aromatic she could smell them through the plastic bag completed the foundation of what would become her interpretation of a classic caprese, elevated with a balsamic reduction she planned to make from scratch. The main course required more thought. She needed something that would showcase technique without relying on expensive ingredients. Her eyes fell on duck legs at a vendor who specialized in free-range poultry. They were less expensive than duck breast, but required more skill to execute properly. Slow braised until the meat fell off the bone, paired with a rustic polenta made from stone-ground cornmeal and finished with a cherry gastric that would balance richness with acidity. For dessert, she chose simplicity over complexity. Fresh strawberries, heavy cream and vanilla beans for a panna cotta that would rely entirely on the quality of ingredients and precision of technique. No molecular gastronomy tricks, no architectural presentations that prioritized appearance over flavor. Just pure, honest flavor that would remind the judges why they fell in love with food in the first place. Meanwhile, across the city, Alexander Blackwood was conducting his own ingredient procurement, though his approach was markedly different. He stood in the gleaming kitchen of his flagship restaurant, surrounded by sous chefs and suppliers who had been summoned at dawn to assist in his preparation. Where Maya had walked through the farmer's market with careful deliberation, Alexander moved through his resources with the efficiency of a general commanding an army. His menu was ambitious, designed to showcase not just his culinary skills, but the vast network of connections that money and influence could provide. For his appetizer, he had selected dayboat scallops flown in from Maine, paired with cauliflower puree infused with truffle oil and finished with microgreens that cost more per ounce than most people spent on an entire meal. The main course would be Wagyu beef, dry-aged for 28 days and sourced from a ranch in Montana, where the cattle were fed a diet of grain and beer. It would be accompanied by fondant potatoes, their preparation requiring a technique that took years to master, and a red wine reduction made from a bottle that retailed for more than Maya made in a week. For dessert, Alexander had chosen to create a deconstructed lemon tart, with components that would be assembled tableside by one of his pastry chefs. It was a dish that required not only technical skill but also theatrical presentation, designed to remind the judges that dining was about more than just taste. It was about experience, about the kind of refined luxury that separated fine dining from mere sustenance. As the afternoon wore on, both competitors made their final preparations. Maya spent hours in her apartment, practicing knife cuts and timing her sauces. She had borrowed some equipment from Carmen, whose brother worked at a catering company, but for the most part she would be working with the same tools and constraints she faced every day at Sal's. Alexander, by contrast, had arranged for a mobile kitchen unit to be installed in the parking lot behind the diner. It was equipped with induction burners, a salamander broiler, and precision immersion circulators that would allow him to cook his proteins to exact temperatures. His team had spent the morning calibrating equipment and arranging ingredients with the precision of a surgical suite. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. On one side, a working-class waitress who had learned to cook in a cramped apartment kitchen in the back of a neighbourhood diner. On the other, a billionaire with access to the finest ingredients, equipment, and culinary expertise money could buy. It was David versus Goliath, played out through seared proteins and carefully balanced sauces. As evening approached, word of the challenge had spread far beyond the neighbourhood. Food bloggers, local news crews, and curious onlookers began gathering outside Sal's diner. The judges arrived precisely at 7 o'clock. 3 culinary professionals who had agreed to evaluate the meals blindly, without knowing which dish came from which competitor. Dr. Elena Rodriguez was a professor at the local Culinary Institute, a woman whose palate had been trained through decades of tasting student work and professional kitchens. James Morrison was the food critic for the city's largest newspaper, known for reviews that could make or break restaurants. The third judge was chef Antoine Dubois, a James Beard Award winner who had built his reputation on elevating simple ingredients into extraordinary experiences. Maya stood in the kitchen of Sal's, looking out through the service window at the crowd that had gathered. The familiar space felt different tonight, charged with an energy she had never experienced before. This wasn't just about proving a point anymore. It had become something larger, a symbol of the ongoing struggle between authenticity and artifice, between passion and privilege, between those who had everything and those who had to fight for every opportunity. Carmen squeezed her shoulder. "You've got this, girl. Show them what real cooking looks like." Tommy, the line cook, gave her a nod from behind the grill. "Kitchen's all yours, chef. Make us proud." Even Sal himself, a man who rarely showed emotion, placed a weathered hand on her arm. "Maya, whatever happens tonight, you've already won something important. You've reminded all of us why we fell in love with this crazy business in the first place." Outside, Alexander Blackwood was making his own final preparations, his movements precise and economical as he arranged his mise en place. His team moved around him with choreographed efficiency, each person knowing exactly their role in the evening's performance. The clock on the diner wall showed 7:30. In 30 minutes, the challenge would begin, and Maya Chen would discover whether 3 years of slinging hash and refilling coffee cups had prepared her for the most important cooking challenge of her life. The clock struck 8, and the challenge officially began. Maya took a deep breath, her hands steady as she reached for her knife roll. The familiar weight of the German steel in her palm grounded her, connecting her to countless hours of practice in her apartment kitchen, to late nights experimenting with flavour combinations that would never see the light of day at Sal's regular menu. She started with her mise en place, a ritual that had been drilled into her during her brief time in culinary school. Every ingredient measured, every tool in its designated place. Organisation was the foundation of good cooking, her first instructor had told her, and in a kitchen as small and chaotic as Sal's, that principle would be her lifeline tonight. Through the service window, she could see Alexander in his mobile kitchen, moving with the fluid precision of someone who had never doubted his place in the culinary world. His team surrounded him like satellites orbiting a planet, each movement calculated and purposeful. Maya forced herself to look away. She couldn't afford to be intimidated by his resources or his confidence. Tonight she had to trust in the one thing money couldn't buy. The instinct that came from years of making something beautiful out of nothing. Her first course was deceptively simple. The burrata sat at room temperature, its creamy interior ready to spill onto the plate in luxurious pools. The heirloom tomatoes had been sliced thick, their seeds and juice carefully preserved because Maya knew that's where the real flavour lived. Not in perfection, but in the messy, honest reality of fruit that had ripened under an actual sun. She began her balsamic reduction, the vinegar bubbling and concentrating into something that would coat the back of a spoon. This was alchemy at its most basic level, taking something sharp and astringent and transforming it through heat and time into liquid gold. The basil she would add at the last moment, its oils still vibrant and aromatic when they hit the warm tomatoes. Meanwhile, Alexander was constructing his scallop course with the precision of an architect. Each element was measured to the gram, the temperature monitored with digital thermometers that could detect variations of a single degree. His cauliflower puree was silk smooth, passed through a fine sieve 3 times until it achieved a consistency that was more liquid than solid. The truffle oil was applied with an eyedropper, ensuring each portion received exactly the same amount of that earthy, expensive flavour. Maya moved on to her duck legs, seasoning them generously before searing the skin until it crackled and rendered its fat. This was cooking that required patience, the kind of technique that couldn't be rushed or shortcut. She would braise these legs low and slow, allowing the tough connective tissue to break down into gelatin that would make the meat succulent and rich. It was peasant cooking elevated through understanding. The kind of dish that told a story about making the best of what you had. The polenta she stirred constantly, adding warm stock 1 ladle at a time until the cornmeal transformed from gritty powder into something creamy and comforting. This wasn't the instant polenta from a box that most restaurants used as a shortcut. This was stone-ground corn that still tasted like the fields where it grew, requiring attention and care, but rewarding that effort with flavour that couldn't be faked. Alexander's Wagyu was a study in precision cooking. He had vacuum-sealed the steaks with herbs and sealed them in a water bath heated to exactly 132 degrees Fahrenheit. The meat would cook slowly and evenly, reaching the perfect medium rare throughout without any grey band of overcooked protein. It was a technique that required expensive equipment, but guaranteed results, removing the human element of timing and intuition that made cooking both challenging and personal. His fondant potatoes were a testament to classical French technique. Each potato cylinder was carved to identical dimensions, then slowly cooked in butter and stock until the exterior developed a golden crust while the interior became creamy and light. It was the kind of preparation that separated trained chefs from home cooks, requiring not just skill, but the kind of muscle memory that came from years of repetition. Maya's cherry gastrique was a balancing act between sweet and sour. The fruit's natural sugars caramelized before being deglazed with vinegar that would cut through the richness of the duck. She tasted constantly, adjusting the seasoning with the confidence of someone who understood that recipes were guidelines, not gospel. Her palate was her most valuable tool, honed through years of tasting everything that came out of Sal's kitchen, learning to distinguish between good enough and actually good. As the evening progressed, the differences in their approaches became increasingly apparent. Alexander's team moved with military precision. Each task completed exactly as planned, every component finished at precisely the calculated time. Maya worked alone, adapting and adjusting as she went, trusting her instincts when a sauce needed another minute or when the seasoning wasn't quite right. The crowd outside had grown larger, drawn by social media posts and word of mouth. Food bloggers live-streamed from their phones, while local news crews set up cameras to capture what had become an unexpected spectacle. This wasn't just a cooking competition anymore. It had evolved into something symbolic, a clash between 2 philosophies of food and life. Dr. Rodriguez, the culinary professor, watched both kitchens with the analytical eye of someone who had spent decades evaluating technique and creativity. She noted Alexander's flawless execution, the way his team anticipated his needs and responded with choreographed efficiency. But she also observed Maya's intuitive adjustments, the way she tasted and corrected, building flavors through experience rather than following predetermined formulas. James Morrison, the food critic, was more interested in the story unfolding before him. He had reviewed Alexander's restaurants before, always finding them technically perfect, but sometimes lacking in soul. The Billionaire's approach to food was undeniably skilled, but it felt calculated, designed to impress rather than nourish. Maya's cooking, even viewed from a distance, seemed to come from a different place entirely. Every movement spoke of personal investment, of cooking that meant something beyond mere sustenance. Chef Dubois remained silent, his experienced eyes taking in details that others might miss. He watched Maya work with ingredients that most fine dining chefs would consider beneath their station, transforming humble duck legs and simple polenta into something that already smelled extraordinary. He observed Alexander's technical mastery, the way expensive ingredients were handled with the reverence they commanded. Both approaches had merit, but they represented fundamentally different relationships with food itself. Maya began plating her first course, each component finding its place on the simple white plates Sal's used for everything from eggs over easy to the occasional birthday dessert. The sliced tomatoes formed a foundation, their juices already beginning to mingle with the reduced balsamic. The burrata she broke open at the last moment, allowing its creamy centre to flow across the plate like edible silk. Fresh basil leaves were torn by hand, their bruised edges releasing oils that would perfume the entire dish. It wasn't the most beautiful presentation she had ever seen. There were no precise quenelles or geometric arrangements, no microgreens positioned with tweezers, but it looked like food that wanted to be eaten, honest and inviting in a way that transcended mere aesthetics. This was a dish that told a story about summer afternoons and simple pleasures, about the kind of cooking that brought people together around tables rather than impressing them from a distance. Alexander's scallop course was a study in controlled beauty. Each element had its designated space on the plate, the cauliflower puree applied with a palette knife to create smooth, even surfaces. The scallops themselves were perfect golden coins, seared to an exact temperature that left them barely opaque in the center. Microgreens were placed with surgical precision, each tiny leaf contributing to a composition that looked more like art than food. The judges tasted both first courses in silence, their expressions carefully neutral as they made notes on provided scorecards. Maya watched through the service window, trying to read their faces for any hint of their reactions. Dr. Rodriguez chewed thoughtfully, her academic mind analysing technique and flavour balance. Morrison seemed to be considering not just taste, but context, the story each dish told about its creator. Chef Dubois ate with the methodical attention of someone who understood that great food revealed itself in layers, from first impression through lingering aftertaste. As they moved on to prepare their main courses, both competitors fell into the rhythm that separated good cooks from great ones. Maya's duck legs had been braising for over an hour, the meat now tender enough to shred with a fork but still holding together on the bone. The polenta had developed the creamy consistency she was looking for, rich with butter and parmesan that elevated the humble corn into something luxurious. Alexander's Wagyu had reached the perfect internal temperature, the sous vide process ensuring consistent doneness from edge to center. His fondant potatoes were golden and perfect, each one identical to the last. The red wine reduction had been strained and refined until it coated the back of a spoon with glossy perfection, its flavour concentrated and complex. The second round of plating began, and again the differences in philosophy became apparent. Maya's duck leg sat atop a bed of polenta that looked rustic and homemade. The cherry gas streak pooled around the plate in deep red puddles that caught the light. It was food that invited you to dig in, to get your hands a little messy in pursuit of satisfaction. Alexander's Wagyu was presented like a precious gem, the beef sliced to reveal its perfect pink interior and fanned across the plate with architectural precision. The fondant potatoes stood like small monuments, their surfaces glazed to mirror brightness. Every element was positioned for maximum visual impact, creating a composition that photographed beautifully, but somehow felt distant from the actual act of eating. The judges approached the main courses with increased attention, understanding that this round would likely determine the winner. These were the dishes where technique and creativity would be most apparent, where the differences between the two competitors' approaches would be impossible to ignore. Maya stood at the service window, her heart pounding as she watched three of the most influential palates in the city evaluate her life's work condensed into a single plate of food. Everything she had learned, every dream she had shelved, every late night spent perfecting techniques in her cramped kitchen had led to this moment. The final course still awaited, but already she could sense that something fundamental had shifted in the room. This wasn't just about winning or losing anymore. It had become a statement about what food could be, about the value of authenticity in a world that often prized appearance over substance. The real test was just beginning. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she began preparing her final course, the panna cotta that would either cement her victory or seal her defeat. The dessert seemed almost insultingly simple compared to the elaborate presentations she had witnessed from Alexander's kitchen, but she knew that simplicity was often the most difficult thing to execute perfectly. There was nowhere to hide, no fancy techniques to distract from imperfect flavors. She had prepared the base hours earlier, blooming gelatin in cold water before dissolving it into warm cream infused with real vanilla beans. Not extract, but actual beans that she had split and scraped, their tiny black seeds suspended throughout the mixture like edible confetti. The cream had been heated just enough to dissolve the gelatin without scalding, then strained through fine mesh to remove any lumps that might mar the silky texture. Now came the moment of truth. She unmolded each panna cotta with the careful precision of someone handling live ammunition. The custards held their shape, wobbling slightly as she transferred them to plates, their surfaces glossy and perfect. The strawberries she had selected that morning were at the peak of ripeness, their natural sweetness concentrated by the afternoon sun. She sliced them with quick, confident cuts, arranging them around each panna cotta in casual abundance. A simple strawberry coulis provided the final touch, made from berries that had been too soft for slicing but perfect for pureeing. She had cooked them down with just a touch of sugar and lemon juice, creating a sauce that was intensely fruity without being cloying. It pooled around each dessert like liquid rubies, the colour so vibrant it seemed to glow under the diner's harsh fluorescent lights. Meanwhile, Alexander was orchestrating his own dessert masterpiece with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. His deconstructed lemon tart was a study in molecular gastronomy, each component existing independently before being assembled tableside for maximum theatrical impact. The lemon curd had been prepared using techniques that required precise temperature control, heated slowly while being whisked constantly to achieve a consistency that was both rich and light. His pastry chef had created delicate tuile cookies that would serve as the tart shell, each one shaped into elegant curves that defied gravity. Candied lemon zest provided textural contrast, each strip cut with mathematical precision and cooked in syrup until it achieved the perfect balance between tender and chewy. A quenelle of Maya lemon sorbet would complete each plate, its pale yellow colour and intense citrus flavour designed to cleanse the palate while providing temperature contrast. The presentation would be performed at each judge's table, with components assembled in real time while they watched. It was dinner theatre at its most refined, a reminder that fine dining was about more than just taste. It was about experience, about creating moments that would linger in memory long after the last bite had been consumed. Dr. Rodriguez watched both dessert preparations with growing fascination. The contrast between the two approaches was almost philosophical in its implications. Maya's panna cotta represented the Italian tradition of dolce, desserts that were meant to comfort and satisfy, to end a meal with warmth and contentment. Alexander's deconstructed tart was pure innovation, challenging conventional notions of what dessert could be and demanding active engagement from the diner. James Morrison was already composing his review in his head, understanding that this evening had provided him with material that went far beyond a simple restaurant critique. This was a story about class and culture, about the democratization of fine dining, and the ongoing tension between tradition and innovation. Both competitors had demonstrated remarkable skill, but they had done so in service of completely different visions of what food should accomplish. Chef Dubois remained the most inscrutable of the three judges, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. He had built his reputation on dishes that bridged the gap between rustic and refined, understanding that the best food often came from a place of emotional honesty rather than technical showmanship. He was curious to see which approach would ultimately prove more satisfying, more memorable, more worthy of victory. The moment arrived for final plating and presentation. Maya arranged her panna cotta with the confident movements of someone who had found her rhythm, no longer nervous about the judges or the cameras or the crowd that had gathered outside. She was cooking her truth, presenting food that represented everything she believed about hospitality and nourishment, and the simple pleasure of a perfectly executed dish. Each plate told a story of summer afternoons and simple pleasures, of desserts that grandmothers made for Sunday dinners and lovers shared on park benches. The panna cotta wobbled invitingly, its surface catching the light like silk. The strawberries looked like they had been picked that morning, which they had, their natural beauty enhanced but not disguised by careful arrangement. This was food that made you think of happiness, of celebration, of the kind of uncomplicated joy that seemed increasingly rare in an overcomplicated world. Alexander's presentation was pure theatre, his pastry chef moving with balletic grace as she assembled each deconstructed tart. The components came together like a puzzle being solved in real time, each element finding its designated place in a composition that was as much sculpture as dessert. The lemon curd was piped with artistic flourishes, the tuile cookies positioned to create dramatic height and visual interest. The candied zest provided pops of colour and texture, while the sorbet quenelle sat like a perfect oval jewel atop the entire creation. It was undeniably impressive, the kind of dessert that would photograph beautifully and generate social media buzz. This was food as performance art designed to dazzle and surprise, to create Instagram moments and conversation starters. It represented everything that modern fine dining aspired to be: innovative, technically perfect, and utterly memorable. The judges approached their final tastings with the gravity of Supreme Court justices considering a landmark case. They understood that their decision would ripple far beyond this single evening, becoming part of a larger conversation about authenticity versus innovation, tradition versus progress, the working class versus the elite. Maya watched through the service window as Dr. Rodriguez lifted a spoonful of panna cotta to her lips, her expression thoughtful as she considered not just the flavour, but the technique required to achieve such perfect texture. The custard was silky and rich without being heavy, the vanilla providing warmth and depth while the strawberries added brightness and acidity. It was a dessert that revealed its complexity slowly, each bite building upon the last to create an experience that was greater than the sum of its parts. Morrison approached Alexander's deconstructed tart with visible appreciation for its visual impact, understanding that presentation was part of the overall dining experience. The lemon curd was intensely flavoured, its tartness balanced by the sweetness of the tuile and the refreshing coldness of the sorbet. Each component contributed something different to the overall composition, creating a dessert that evolved with every bite, surprising the palate with unexpected combinations and contrasts. Chef Dubois ate both desserts with the methodical attention of someone who understood that great food often revealed itself in subtle ways. He noted the technical skill required for Maya's seemingly simple panna cotta, the precise balance of gelatin and cream that created its perfect wobble. He appreciated the innovation of Alexander's deconstructed approach, the way it challenged conventional expectations while still delivering intense lemon flavour. The judges retreated to a quiet corner of the diner to deliberate, their voices low and serious as they compared notes and impressions. Maya stood in the kitchen that had been her second home for 3 years, suddenly aware of every scratch on the cutting boards, every stain on the walls, every imperfection that made this place feel real and lived in. This kitchen had witnessed countless meals served to hungry customers, birthday celebrations for regular patrons, late-night conversations between co-workers who had become family. Outside, Alexander supervised the cleanup of his mobile kitchen with the same precision he had brought to his cooking. His team moved efficiently, packing equipment and disposing of waste with choreographed movements. He had approached this challenge the same way he approached everything else in his life, with overwhelming resources, meticulous planning, and absolute confidence in his ability to achieve the desired outcome. The crowd outside had grown restless, phones held high to capture whatever announcement was coming. Food bloggers provided live commentary to their followers, while local news crews prepared to broadcast the results to the wider city. What had started as a simple dispute over coffee quality had evolved into something much larger, a cultural moment that would be discussed and analysed for years to come. Carmen squeezed Maya's hand as they waited for the judges to return. "You did something amazing tonight," she whispered. "Win or lose, you showed everyone what real passion looks like. You reminded us all why we fell in love with cooking in the first place." Tommy nodded from behind the grill, his usual gruff demeanour softened by obvious pride. "That duck leg was something special, chef. I've been cooking for 20 years and I've never seen anything like what you did with those simple ingredients." Even Sal himself seemed transformed by the evening's events, his weathered face showing more emotion than Maya had seen in 3 years of working for him. "Whatever happens next, you've already won something important. You've shown the world that good food doesn't have to come from fancy kitchens or expensive ingredients. It comes from the heart." The judges returned, their faces carefully neutral as they prepared to deliver their verdict. Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent diner. "Both competitors have demonstrated remarkable skill and creativity tonight. This was not just a cooking competition, but a showcase of 2 distinct philosophies of food and hospitality." She paused, allowing the tension to build as cameras focused and phones recorded. The decision was not unanimous, but after careful consideration and extensive discussion, we have reached a conclusion. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs, each beat seeming to echo in the absolute silence that had fallen over the diner. 3 years of dreams deferred, a lifetime of doubting whether she was good enough, talented enough, worthy enough. All came down to this single moment. Beside her, Carmen's grip on her hand tightened, a silent reminder that she was not alone in this. Alexander stood in the doorway of his mobile kitchen, his expression unreadable, but his posture betraying a confidence that suggested he had never seriously considered the possibility of defeat. This was simply another business transaction, another challenge to be overcome through superior resources and strategic thinking. The crowd outside pressed closer to the windows, their collective breath fogging the glass as they strained to hear the judge's decision. Food bloggers paused their live streams, understanding that this moment would define not just the evening, but potentially the careers of everyone involved. Dr. Rodriguez held the envelope containing their decision, her academic composure the only thing standing between this moment and chaos. "The winner of tonight's challenge," she announced, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "is decided not just on technical skill, but on the ability to create food that tells a story, that connects with the soul as well as the palate." Maya closed her eyes, preparing herself for either vindication or devastation, knowing that either way her life would never be the same after tonight. The next words would determine not just the winner of a cooking challenge, but the direction of dreams that had been 3 years in the making. "The winner is Maya Chen." The words hit the diner like a thunderclap. For a moment, the silence was absolute, as if the entire world had stopped breathing. Then Carmen's scream of joy shattered the quiet, followed by Tommy's whooping from behind the grill and the thunderous applause of everyone who had witnessed this impossible victory. Maya stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She had won. She had actually won. Dr. Rodriguez continued, her voice warm with genuine admiration. "Maya's food told a story that we could taste, smell, and feel. Every dish demonstrated not just technical skill, but an understanding of what food means to people. Her panna cotta wasn't just dessert, it was a memory of summer afternoons and simple pleasures. That's the kind of cooking that changes lives. Alexander Blackwood stepped forward, and for the first time all evening, his composed mask slipped entirely. What Maya saw underneath wasn't arrogance or anger, but something that looked remarkably like respect. He extended his hand to her, and when she shook it, his grip was firm and genuine. "You proved me wrong tonight, Maya Chen," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the celebrating crowd. "I came here thinking I understood what good food was, but you showed me something I had forgotten. You reminded me why I fell in love with cooking in the first place, before it became about profit margins and Michelin stars." As he walked toward the door, Alexander paused and turned back one final time. "The check will be delivered tomorrow morning. $50,000 as promised. But more importantly, you've taught this old fool that the best ingredients money can buy mean nothing without the one thing you can't purchase: soul." The bell chimed as he disappeared into the night, leaving behind a diner transformed. Maya looked around at the faces surrounding her, these people who had become her family, who had believed in her when she had stopped believing in herself. She had won more than a cooking competition tonight. She had reclaimed her dreams and proven that passion, authenticity, and heart could triumph over privilege and resources. Sometimes the most important victories happen not in gleaming kitchens or Michelin-starred restaurants, but in places like Sal's Diner, where real people serve real food to other real people. Maya Chen had reminded everyone watching that the best meals aren't about expensive ingredients or perfect technique. They're about the love, care, and soul that goes into every single dish. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough to change everything.